Let's talk about the chart nodes. So in this tutorial, we covered basically two nodes. Let's open a new scene, Control N, and let's go to our logic layout. Okay, you can find the chart nodes in the toolbox under the geometry category, and then down here you have the chart nodes. If we right click, we have basically two charts. That's the line chart and the area chart. Line charts you can use to create, for example, statistics, to visualize values right in a chart. So let's start here with our line chart first. Simply drag and drop that here, and then you can see by default we have here already that little chart here in the center. Let's uh, add an axis in front and scale it up maybe by 3 or so exactly, right? So let's check the settings of our chart node. So we have the size X, right? So here you can stretch it out basically. We have the scale Y if you want to scale it in the Y axis, and we also can give it a depth, right? So as you can see here with that set value, and then the value is basically coming here from that chart, and this is basically a float array, right? So by default, it's it has already some numbers inside here which you can change manually, but that's not the right way. So to work with charts, you basically also need to use array nodes. So let's do that now. Let's simply bring in here a array node. Let's use that, and we choose then here float, and let's say we want to have 12 values, maybe for a year every month, right? If you want to represent that, right? So, and as we create that float array, then you can see we have here 12 inputs starting from index 0 until to value 11, right? And simply thing to do, you simply take now your chart values from this float array, right? And of course, all is 0 now, but if you change now your values here, something like that, something like that, something like that, as you can see, our chart will simply add these values, and you can then also animate them, or you can bind this array to a database, things like that, or directly bind your chart to a database if your database sends out a float array or int array or whatever, right? So this is now a basic setup of a chart. Like I said before, you can change here the the scaling in X. You can change here the scaling in Y. You also are able to have here some more options like in percentage the visibility of this chart, right? You also can say, hey, you just want to show the positive um, numbers or values, or you just want to show the negative values, or by default you want to show both or all of them, right? You can add a stop flag and things like that. Then you also can set up basically the how your line looks like, right? So you can make it smaller, you can make it larger. This is all up to you here, right? So voila, now that's stuck inside there. Okay, let's make that 0.05. Exactly. Then you also have here the corner threshold, right? So as you can see, he's beveling out that corner a little bit. And of course, you also can add here some textures like we had in other geometry nodes already, where you can swap it between flat and lengthwise. Okay. Also, the outputs are very interesting here, as you can see down here. We have here, for example, our first point, which would be this one, and we also would have our last visible point, which would be this guy here, right? So let's say you want to have a start point and an end point. Let's put that here. Let's make it a circle. And maybe this one we give a solid color, like something. Let's use that whatever blue. So we have a blue start point. Let's make it a bit smaller. And then we simply, let's copy that. Let's call that start point. And let's call this last point in our chart, right? And let's give that maybe a different color. Let's make that red. And now you simply can add this values, basically the X and Y value, right? From the start point, you simply can take from here, from the first, right? So let's do that. I want to have position X is on my chart on my first pos X and my value Y we take here from our first pos Y. And now you can see our axis is now always on the first point, on the first position of that. Let's do that with the last point as well. So our last point is also coming, getting the possession X from from our last visible, or the last, it's pretty much the same here. Let's use our last position X, and you can see it jump already in the X direction, and our Y we also take from here, our last position Y. And as you can see, now we have the two start points, right? Of course, you also can make them smaller or larger or whatever, but however you change in that chart now, right? So that would always stay, that first and last point would always stay there, right? So let's maybe scale it up to whatever, let's say 10, and let's give that the default Y value, right? Now, for example, we also want to have it a little bit 3D-ish, right? Let's also add maybe a zero line. So let's use the axis and put that zero line maybe here above, and let's use a rectangle, and let's add this rectangle. Let's make that rectangle very slim, and maybe we align it here now from left, and now we just make that a little bit larger, right? And now we have here that nice zero line. And again, if we switch now the chart here, for example, only show our positive, right? Then we can see we only show the positives. If we only want to show the negatives, then we have that as well. And again, if we change here our float array, let's again bring that back to default. So we want to show everything. And if I change here, maybe my last point down here, you can see that endpoint always stays on that point, right? Okay, let's bring that down to 0. Also another thing, let's maybe quickly add here also a texture. So we simply add here a texture here in front of our chart, right? And now you can see already we have here that stretched texture in the center, but here we can also maybe use something else. Let's use here not a loader, let's use here texture property, a 1D gradient. Maybe we use that one, right? And as you can see now, that gradient is spanning horizontally from top to bottom, right? But if we change now here our where was it here under texture in our chart, if we change that here to lengthwise, then yeah, you can't see it very nice now, but let's bring it a little bit closer. Then you can see now he is basically the mapping, the UV mapping is going along that line, right? Was a bit too small. Let's bring that up, and that's all good. So this is the line chart. The second chart we will cover here, which actually has pretty much the same settings like our line chart, would be then here our area chart, right? So if we bring that in, right, you can see now this is area chart, not just a line chart. Let's again bring an axis here in front, scale it up a bit, and maybe bring it a bit more to that side. And same here, as you can see, we have here our X and Y scale. We can give it a depth, right? And of course, we also should bind an array here. So let's do that again, array. Let's add that 12 float array, and let's simply connect the values to this float array. And again, now we give that whatever 2, 1, minus 2, minus 0 0.5, and so on. Just some numbers, right? Something like that, something like this, something like this, and like this as well, right? Exactly. So again, here same settings, right? Same settings with our visibility. The depths we talked already about, and again, if we now turn this guy around, you can see we have a nice 3D chart basically, which you then can fit to, yeah, again, to a yearly view, but that's all up to you what you want to do here, right? You can add some grids around that chart. You also again can put some textures here, right? Let's add here some texture. And again, maybe let's use a gradient again, a 1D gradient, and here we use this guy, right? Or maybe another gradient. Let's use this guy, right? And of course, again, if we play around here with our texture, which we actually don't have here, right? So this is pretty much one property which that area chart don't have. But again, you can also adjust, because we see here's the 0 point now, right? But you can also adjust that texture now via this mapping, for example. But again, this is also something we will cover when we are coming to that material node, right? But just to give you a quick idea, you see now you can say everything here. Let's put it 0.5, and then we also want to change that gradient. We want to have our red here is actually green. Everything positive should be green. Let's move that a bit away because they lie above each other, and our negative is here, right? And of course, maybe now we should bring them back to the center. And now it jumped again. Let's bring that a bit more over there. Yeah. And now you can see all the positive values will have a color of green. All the negative values will have a color of red.